Good day, everyone! Have you ever heard these terms? Fauvism, Expressionism, Cubism, or what about Dada? Surrealism, Abstract Expressionism, what about pop and optical art, photorealism and minimalism? Some may be familiar with these terms, but let me tell you, these are art movements under the era of new media and new art forms. By the way, I'm Eric Charles T. Montoya, the leader of the group, and without further ado, let's proceed to our learning objectives, which is number 1. At the end of discussion, learners must be able to distinguish all art movements under new media and new art forms. Number 2, learners must be able to enumerate key artists of each art movement. Number 3, learners must be able to identify key artworks and how it is different from another art movement. And lastly, learners must be able to comprehend the importance of each art movement. And now, for you learners to achieve the objective for today's discussion, yours truly will discuss the Fauvism art, Miss Domingo will discuss Expressionism, Miss Julian will discuss Cubism, Mr. Agatep will discuss the Dada art, Mr. Disono will discuss Surrealism, Miss Bareng will discuss Abstract Expressionism, Miss Duran will discuss Pop art, Miss Rangkapan will discuss Optical art, Miss Ampanya will discuss Photorealism, and lastly, Miss Dayoan will discuss Minimalism. In every art movement, the presenter will lay down the history of the art movement, its key artists, and important artworks. So without further ado, let's go! Hi, it's me again, Eric Charles T. Montoya, and let me start the discussion by discussing the Fauvism art movement. Before we proceed formally to our topic, let's have first an introductory game. Alam ko masisiyahan kayo dito. That will enlighten your mood and will give you a background of what Fauvism is all about. And the game is called Jumble to Match the Image. And now for the direction, form a word out of the scrambled letter that corresponds to the photo. So let's start. Let's proceed to our first image. Are you familiar with it? I know, parang familiar, no? So, the correct answer is color. Clap if you got it right. Now, let's proceed to our second photo. Oh, I think it's very easy. It's very easy, guys. If you're thinking of Paris or Paris, you're correct. So, what is the connection of color and Paris or Paris in our topic Fauvism? Well, between 1901 and 1906, several comprehensive exhibitions were held in Paris, making the work of Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, and Paul Cézanne widely accessible for the first time. For the painters who saw the achievements of these great artists, the effect was one of liberation and they began to experiment with radical new styles. And Fauvism was the first movement of this modern period in which color ruled supreme. So meaning, guys, color was the first or the main characteristic of Fauvism art, which started in Paris. That's why I've selected the word color and Paris. And now let's proceed to our next slide. Fauvism or French Fauvism style of painting that flourished in France from 1898 to 1908. It used pure brilliant color applied straight from the paint tubes in an aggressive, direct manner to create a sense of an explosion on the canvas. The Fauves painted directly from nature as the Impressionists had before them, but their works were invested with a strong, expressive reaction to the subjects they painted. Fauvism is first formally exhibited in Paris in 1905. Fauvist paintings shocked visitors to the annual Salon d'Automne. One of these visitors was the critic Louis Vauxhall, who, because of the violence of their works, dubbed the painters Les Fauves, or meaning wild beasts. The advent of modernism is often dated by the appearance of the Fauves in Paris at the Salon d'Automne in 1905. Their style of painting, using non-naturalistic colors, was one of the first avant-garde developments in European art. They greatly admired Van Gogh, who said of his own work, "Instead of trying to render what I see before me, I use color in a completely arbitrary way to express myself powerfully." And now, the Fauvists carried this idea further, translating their feelings into color with a rough, almost clumsy style. Matisse was a dominant figure in the movement. Other Fauvists include Vlaminck, Derain, Marquet, and Rouault. However, they did not perform a cohesive group, and by 1908, a number of painters had seceded to Cubism. How sad. And because of that, Fauvism was a short-lived movement, lasting only as long as its originator, Henri Matisse, fought to find the artistic freedom he needed. Matisse had to make color serve his art, rather as Gauguin needed to paint the sad pink to express an emotion. The Fauvists believe absolutely in color as an emotional force, because color lost its descriptive qualities and became luminous, creating light rather than imitating it. And now let's proceed to our key artist of Fauvism. And of course, number one on the list is Henri Matisse. He is a French painter, draftsman, and collagist. Born December 31, 1869 and died November 3, 1954. He is the leader of the Fauvism movement. He sought to create an art that would be a soothing, calming influence on the mind rather than like a god armchair. And he is also highly regarded as a sculptor. And now for his accomplishments, Matisse used pure colors and the white of exposed canvas to create a light-filled atmosphere in his Fauve paintings, rather than using modeling or shading to lend volume and structure to his pictures. Matisse used contrasting areas of pure unmodulated color. These ideas continued to be important to him throughout his career. And also, his art was important in endorsing the value of decoration in modern art. However, although he is popularly regarded as a painter devoted to pleasure and contentment, his use of color and pattern is often deliberately disorienting and unsettling. Matisse was heavily influenced by art from other cultures, having seen several exhibitions of Asian art and having traveled to North Africa. He incorporated also some of the decorative qualities of Islamic art, the angularity of African sculpture, and the flatness of Japanese prints into his own style. And Matisse once declared that he wanted his art to be one of balance, of purity, and serenity, devoid of troubling or depressing subject matter. And this aspiration was an important influence on some, such as Clement Greenberg, who looked to art to provide shelter from the disorientation of modern world. And now, number 2 on our list is Maurice de Vlaminck, French painter, graphic designer, and a writer. He's born April 4, 1876 and died October 11, 1958. Fun fact about Vlaminck, he seems to have been into contests with iconic cubist or legendary womanizer or notoriously egoistical Pablo Picasso. What these two rebellious artists did have in common was an uncanny ability to innovate or to create something completely new. For Picasso, it was Cubism. For Vlaminck and his fellow Fauves, André Derain and Henri Matisse, it was the bright, expressive colors likened to firecrackers and outrageously unconventional depictions that earned the group their influential place in history. Vlaminck later railed against development in modern art when ironically he was one of the true pioneers of modernists. And for his accomplishments, Vlaminck, along with other Fauve painters, continued the approach established by the Impressionists of rejecting conventional themes and instead representing scenes from everyday life, rather than depicting stories from mythology, history, or portraying notable figures. His paintings often featured unremarkable cityscapes and landscapes, as well as unknown denizens of Parisian nightlife, all enlivened by his bright and natural fauve palette. Even though he experimented with the Cubist style, Vlaminck seems to have regarded Cubism as an unworthy opponent, grabe siya, of what he saw as the more revolutionary artistic style of the Fauves. He alienated himself from the Paris art world by his outspoken condemnation not only of Cubism but of its most renowned co-founder, Picasso. Vlaminck's particularly brand of Fauvism incorporated heavy, dark outlining of brightly colored forms that, more so than those of the other Fauves, had a profound impact on the development of abstract, expressive painting and printmaking on German modernist artists like Wassily Kandinsky, Ernst Kirchner, and Emile Nolde. And now number 3 on our list is André Derain, French painter, writer, set designer, illustrator, and sculptor. Born June 10, 1880 and died September 8, 1954. André Derain had a major role in the development of two of the most significant artistic movements of the early 20th century. He, Henri Matisse, and Maurice de Vlaminck were responsible for generating works with a totally new style which would become Fauvism, and his association with Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque was integral to early Cubism. Nevertheless, his contribution as the generator of the ideas behind this movement is constantly debated, and some considered his work derivative. This is due in part to the fact that, continually in search of artistic meaning and attempting to create a timeless art removed from the specificity of the modern age, he experimented with different stylistic idioms. However, whichever side of the Derain debate you end up on, we can all appreciate his use of expressive vibrant color, his simplification of form, his fascination with primitive art were constants throughout his work and played a major role in the creation and propagation of early modern art. And now let's proceed to his accomplishments. Derain was one of the founders of the Fauve artistic movement along with Matisse. Although fascinated, he wanted to give a much greater appreciation to the expressionistic qualities of paint. His works are characterized by dense, vibrant brushworks that attract the viewer's attention as much as the subject itself. Derain's interest in primitive masks began after viewing those exhibited at the Negro Museum in London, and he was one of the first to collect tribal art from Africa. It is likely that he was responsible for the interest in primitive elements espoused by Cubist artists such as Picasso and Braque. Derain was briefly interested in Cubist stylistic movements himself, but his stylistic exploration of it was very brief. In addition, Derain searched for an art that didn't need context to be of value, that would have a meaning for any generation, aligned him with the school of symbolism. His decorative paintings describing the beauty of nature and individuals enjoying that nature differ significantly from those by the Impressionists before him, who tried to depict modern life more realistically. His focus is more the beauty of what is described on the canvas regardless of its specifics. This generality denoted an inclination toward the idealism of classical art. Fun fact, the Nazi regime was especially attracted to Derain's later embrace of a classical style, the embrace of Greek grandeur suiting their own claim to superior roots. Yet, his alignment with the Nazi Party during their occupation of France earned him a questionable place in the history of modern painting, forever compromising his revolutionary contributions. So sad, di ba guys? And worthy to include as key artists of Fauvism art movement were number 4, Kees van Dongen or Kees van Dongen, a Dutch-French painter born January 26, 1877 and died May 28, 1968. And number 5, Raoul Dufy, a French painter, printmaker, and textile designer. Born June 3, 1877 and died March 23, 1953. And last, Georges Braque, a French painter, collagist, draftsman, printmaker, and sculptor. Born May 13, 1882 and died August 31, 1963. And now let's proceed to the important art of Fauvism. Now, the number 1 is painted by Henri Matisse, titled Lux, Calme et Volupté, 1904. This early work by Matisse clearly indicates the artist's stylistic influences, most notably Georges Seurat's Pointillism and Paul Signac's Diffusionism, in the use of tiny dabs of color to create a visual vision. What sets this work apart from these more rigid methods, however, is Matisse's intense concentration of pure color. The oranges, yellows, greens, and other colors all maintain their own discrete places on the picture plane, never quite merging to form the harmonious tonality that both Seurat and Signac were known for, and instead heighten the almost vertiginous effect created by the striking dots of paint. Matisse took this work's title, which translates as Luxury, Peace, and Pleasure, from Charles Baudelaire's poem L'Invitation en Voyage, or Invitation to a Voyage. Number 2 on our list is The River Seine et Chateau, 1906, artist Maurice de Vlaminck. This scene depicts the portion of the Seine that runs through Chateau, the Paris suburb, where de Vlaminck and Derain shared a studio beginning in 1901. For the river scene, de Vlaminck used impasto, a thick daubs of paint applied directly from the tube, then brushed together in short strokes to create the effect of movement. For the water and sky, de Vlaminck used a range of blues and greens as well as dazzling whites highlights applied in chubby dabs. The two red and orange trees at the left provide a lively contrast. The finished effect is one of brightness and vibrating motion, detail and traditional perspective matter far less than a sense of buoyant pleasure. As de Vlaminck said, I try to paint with my heart and my guts without worrying about style. And that's great. And lastly is Pinede et Cazis, a landscape painting in 1907, artist André Derain. Derain famously claimed to use color as a means of expressing my emotion and not as a transcription of nature. In this painting, just as in his famous Mountains at Collioure, 1905, Derain used long, isolated brush strokes influenced by divisionist painting to structure the trees and ground of his landscape. The colors are indeed non-representational, even unnatural. The trees' trunks are almost green, and the landscape is abstracted in patches of bright yellow and orange. The pulsing brushwork and jarring contrast of these colors suggest the shimmering heat of a Mediterranean summer by rejecting charicharo and special depth. Derain keeps the viewer's attention fixed on this effect of light and on the life force that seems to ripple through every element of the landscape. And that's it for Fauvism art movement. I hope you learned something, guys, and I will pass the microphone to Bea Domingo.
Hey there, I am Bea Domingo and I am going to discuss Expressionism. But first, let me test your ability in identifying whether an art is a work of Expressionism or not. Shown in the screen are 5 pictures, and I want you to determine whether which one of them is an example of Expressionism. If you answered that 4 out of 5 is an example of Expressionism art, then you got it right. And we chose this picture as the imposter among them. Well then, you do have a keen set of sight. I assume that you are now ready to learn more about the said topic, right? So let's go and define the Expressionism. Expressionism was a vast artistic trend that was difficult to categorize. This was due to its proximity to other key modernist movements such as Vorticism, Cubism, Futurism, and Dadaism. Expressionism spans multiple countries, mediums, and eras, making it impossible to pin down with a single set of visual principles. So what really Expressionism is? Expressionism was seen as a means of self-expression as well as critique. While the phrase was most commonly associated with artworks created in the 20th century, it also included works developed in response to the degrading effects of industrialization and urbanization. Hence, Expressionism is an artistic style in which the artist seeks to depict not objective reality but rather the subjective emotions and responses that objects and events arouse within a person. So where and when did Expressionism started? The Expressionism years began in Germany in 1905 and encompassed an avant-garde movement that used exaggerations and distortions within artworks to perfectly reflect life in the 20th century from a subjective standpoint. So Expressionism emerged amid a time of great change and upheaval in Europe, wherein society was rapidly expanding due to the industrialization that had swept the continent, as well as the unstable current state of affairs that existed inside countries after World War I. As a result of this, German artists created artworks in response to these two significant occurrences. Hence, the Expressionist movement greatly affected a wide range of artistic disciplines, including literature, drama, and cinema. We now go into what distinguishes Expressionism art. Other early 20th century movements such as Post-Impressionism, Fauvism, and Symbolism influenced the Expressionist art movement. When developing Expressionist art, artists included elements from other movements, such as their fondness of arbitrary colors and dissonant arrangements, which was inspired by the Fauves in Paris. One key feature of this movement was the exaggeratedly executed portrayal of subject matter. This, in combination with the swirling and swaying brushwork, managed to accurately portray the artist's chaotic emotional condition as a response to their anxieties about the modern world. So this was done in order to portray the artist's emotive experiences as well as their pure and genuine sentiments and views about the reality in which they live. In addition, what influenced the artist was the influence from the vivid, vibrant, and contemplative works of the post-impressionist era to show the world as it felt rather than how it appeared. Another key is the employment of distortion, exaggeration, primitivism, and fantasy, including the use of violent, disturbing, and aggressive formal aspects. Now that we are aware of the characteristics of Expressionism, we must also know who coined the term as such. In 1910, numerous writers popularized the term Expressionism, but it was allegedly originated by Czech art historian Antonín Matijík, who meant the phrase to denote the absolute opposite of Impressionism. So, Expressionists were believed to seek internally for a deeper meaning, right, in order to accurately represent inner life. However, in Impressionist artists, they were said to look externally to the actual world when portraying instances such as nature and the human form. So while some artists refused to refer to themselves as Expressionists, the notion of the movement was so revolutionary at that time that the term Expressionism has come to represent many styles of contemporary art. So are there any artists who spearheaded the movement? Yes, there are. Artists such as Edvard Munch, Vincent van Gogh, and Henri Matisse are credited with pioneering the Expressionist movement. As Europe's industrialization progressed, artists associated with the Expressionist movement moved to larger cities, bringing their views about art creation with them. As a result, other artists split off somewhere to form the subsequent German Expressionism movement, which included two notable groups known as Die Bruck and Der Blaue So Die Bruck was regarded as the founding member of the German Expressionist movement, having founded in 1905, while Der Blaue succeeded them and was officially formed in 1911. Because of its popularity, Expressionism influenced other movements such as Abstract Expressionism and Neo-Expressionism, and it may be said that the style still exists today. Going back to the group that I mentioned earlier, the Die Bruck, this group was founded in Dresden in 1905 by artists Ernst Ludwig Kirchner, Karl Schmid-Rotluff, Erich Heckel, and Fritz Bleyl. So this group of Expressionist artists was formed as a non-conformist collective. They were influenced by the works of Vincent van Gogh and Edvard Munch and went on to create art that defied Germany's conservative social order. A key character of this group is that they portrayed raw emotion through provocative imagery of modern society. They did this by featuring city inhabitants, prostitutes, nightclubs, and such, exposing German society's filthy underside. So unlike Expressionism's pastoral setting, and the neoclassicism's scholarly drawings, Die Bruck painters used deformed forms and jarring and unnatural use to evoke an emotional response from the viewer. So their name was chosen to emphasize the group's desire to build a bridge between the past and the present, as the word Bruck simply means bridge. Additionally, the name was inspired by a passage of writing by Friedrich Nietzsche, whose writing was a significant factor on the advancement of Expressionism. So now, here are some of the works of the Die Bruck members: The Pharisees of Carl Schmidt Rücklub, Pressy Reclining of Erich Heckel, The Street of Ernst Ludwig Küchner, and The Dancer of Max Pechstein. Following Die Bruck was Der Blaureiter. Der Blaureiter was founded in 1911 by artists Wassily Kandinsky, August Macke, Paul Klee, and Franz Marc. The artists of Der Blaureiter strove to transcend the ordinary within art by pursuing the spiritual work of art instead. This is due to the rising isolation they experienced within the ever-modernizing world. So despite the fact that the group never published a platform, they were united by their artistic innovations, which were influenced by the primitivist and medieval art forms, Fauvism and Cubism. So the group's name was inspired by the horse and rider emblem, borrowed from one of Wassily Kandinsky's painting, and it became their moniker. For Kandinsky, the rider marked the movement from the physical world to the spiritual realm, and so served as a metaphor for artistic practice. Shown in the screen are some of the works of Der Blaureiter. 1 is The Suicide of the Bridge of Paul Klee. 2, The Elephant of Franz Marc. 3rd, The Study for Painting with White Form of Wassily Kandinsky. And 4th, The Tightrope Walker of August Macke. One of the precursors of the movement that I mentioned earlier was Edvard Munch, and across the whole career of Edvard, he excelled in distorted and emotionally fraught portraits depicting death, anguish, and anxiety, which of all themes and approaches that the Expressionist artist eventually adopt. So Munch shows the fight between the individual and society in his most renowned painting. The Scream setting came to Munch while he was strolling over a bridge overlooking Oslo. And the Scream evokes the jolting emotion of the encounter and exhibits a general anxiety toward the tangible world. Next popular Expressionist artist would be Ernst Ludwig Küchner, and here is his work, The Berlin Street. Küchner is noted for his many Berlin street scenes, and this is likely his most well-known picture from that category. His jog, angular brushstrokes, acidic hues, and stretched figures all energize the street environment on the canvas, achieving something quite rebellious for its time and exemplifying the aesthetic rupture with tradition that Die Bruck members aspired. The last work presented or featured in this discussion is Wassily Kandinsky's Der Blaureiter. Der Blaureiter was a groundbreaking work which depicts a lone rider rushing over a field, and it marked a watershed moment in Kandinsky's emerging pictorial style. Kandinsky's canvas became symbol of the artistic opportunities accepted by the Munich avant-garde, serving as a link between post-impressionism and the developing expressionist movement. Hence, we can denote that the group's name, Der Blaureiter, was inspired by this particular work of Kandinsky. So that sums up my discussion. I hope you learned something, and thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, I'm Cyrene Julian, and for today's topic, I will be discussing Cubism. Before anything else, I prepared a mini game called Fact or Bluff. Determine if the statement given is a fact or not. First, Cubism is an influential art movement that was developed during the 19th century. Bluff. Next, the pioneer of Cubism is Pablo Picasso, a Spanish painter. Fact. One example of Cubist painting is Houses a el Staque in 1908 by Pablo Picasso. Bluff. Realistic and synthetic are the two types of Cubism. Bluff. And lastly, Cubism appears to be fragmented and the figures are organized in a manner that creates geometric outlines. Fact. Moving on, we will define Cubism first. Cubism is a very significant art movement that is prominently used in Paris during the early part of the 20th century. Between 1907 and 1914, the Spanish painter Pablo Picasso, together with Georges Braque, pioneered this as a formalist breakthrough in the field of painting. Through this, a new modern reality was established and illustrated, marking a shift from the Renaissance tradition. This art style is defying the sense of movement created by a three-dimensional illustration. The earliest examples of Cubist art may be found in the works of Picasso in 1907 with Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and Brick in Houses Alistaque in 1908. Cubism highlights the two-dimensional surface of the artwork as the primary appearance or design element. The subject of the painting looks fragmented and shattered by dividing elements and figures into various sections or specific planes. The symbols are being rearranged to make geometric patterns, showing different angles or perspectives of it, thus emphasizing cubism as a way to offset the image to cubes or geometric shapes. The artist used this type of art to explore and work with new, different ways of portraying the reality. Cubism have two different types, namely analytic cubism and synthetic cubism. During the first stage of cubism's development, the analytical cubism has a more harsh appearance, which has achieved through the intertwining of flat surfaces and curving lines. Darker colors or muted shades like black and gray are used in this. Meanwhile, comparatively simple outlines and more vivid colors are hallmarks of synthetic cubism. It incorporates realistic features or things like a human face. Moving on with the Cubist artists, we have Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. Pablo Picasso was born in Spain in 1881 and was raised there before going on to spend most of his adult life working as an artist in France. Throughout the long course of his career, he created more than 20,000 paintings, drawings, sculptures, ceramics, and other items such as costumes and theater sets. Picasso's artworks are Seated Woman, Girl Before a Mirror, Le Rêve, and Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Born in 1882, Georges Braque was a Parisian painter from the 20th century. He was most well known for being the founder of Cubism alongside famous artist Pablo Picasso. During the wartime period, the work he put together would change in order to represent the somber, the dark period the world was going through. Braque's artworks are Houses Alistaque, Glass on a Table, Fruit Dish and Glass, and Violin and Palette. That's it for today's topic, and I hope you have learned something.
Good day everyone, I'm John Rinagatat and I'm presenting to you Dada Art. So before we start, we have a game called Describe Me. The instruction is give description to the picture in one word. So the pictures are described to be humorous. As to why it is described as humorous, we will get to know that as we go on with our presentation. Dada Art. So Dada was a loosely organized international movement with members from Europe and North America. So Dada Art isn't just an art, it is also a movement which proved to be one of the most revolutionary art movements of the early 20th century. It coincides with the outbreak of World War I. So the movement, or the Dada movement, was a reaction to traditional logic and reason because it was this logic that had resulted in the war. Thus, the Dadaist work was popularized as an opposite of established reason and logic, being more concerned with chaos and irrationality. It was even dubbed anti-art because it rejected everything that art had traditionally stood for. So the Dadaism art was developed from both Europe and the United States, with the American version being more generally humorous in tone than the European counterpart. This was because of the influence of Marcel Duchamp with his artwork Mona Lisa with a mustache and bird. And he gave this title LHOOQ, which translates to She's Hot in the Ass. The LHOOQ actually is or are pronounced in French, and if you translate these letters into English, it is translated as She is hot in the ass. So the Dadaism art rejected the aesthetics totally, and instead of aiming to be visually pleasing, this art actively sought to offend people. However, the movement's incitement of shock and scandal was deliberate. Thus, the Dadaist magazines were banned and their exhibits were closed. Some of the artists were even imprisoned. These provocations were just part of the entertainment, but as time goes by, the audience expectations outpaced the Dada's movement's ability to deliver. And as the audience began to respond to the artist's well-known sarcastic laugh, the Dadaist provocations began to lose their impact. The Dada art was founded by Hugo Ball, which is famous for his poem Karawane. And this poem was a jumble of sounds and gibberish meant to conjure up images of insanity. And the entire point of the Dada movement was to demonstrate that the world no longer made sense. Sorry for that. Some of the famous Dada artworks. Let's start with the Marcel Duchamp's fountain. So Marcel Duchamp decided to submit a urinal to the Society of Independent Artists in 1917, but the society refused the artwork because they believed that this was not a work of art. Thus, the creation of Marcel Duchamp posed numerous important questions about what constitutes art and is regarded as a major landmark in the 20th century art. The second one is the bicycle wheel, also with the creator of the fountain, Marcel Duchamp, in 1913. So these artworks of Marcel Duchamp were referred to as ready-mades. And this bicycle wheel is his first ready-made object, which was created by combining more than one utilitarian item to create a work of art. And he referred to this bicycle wheel of his as an assisted ready-made. The third one is Man Ray's Ingress, his violin, in 1924. So Man Ray altered what was originally a classical mood by painting F-holes of a stringed instrument, specifically a violin, and a photographic print of his nude model, Kiki de Montparnasse, and rephotographing the print. The female body was now being used as a musical instrument, and he gave this one a title, Le Violin d'Ingres, which means hobby in French. The fourth one is the founder of Dada art that I discussed earlier, the Karawane, which basically is just a jumble of sounds and gibberish meant to conjure up images of insanity. And the last one is the Mechanical Head, also called The Spirit of Our Time by Raoul Hausmann. So the creator of this one was a poet, apologist, and a performance artist, famed for this artwork of his. The mannequin head, or this mechanical head artwork, was made of a solid wooden block with the reversal of the Hegel's assertion that everything is mind. So basically, what Raoul Hausmann's pointing here is that the head is not everything, or the mind isn't everything. So what he's trying to convey here is that he hoped to create an image that would challenge mainstream Western conventions that the head is the seat of reason. So Dada art as a whole is unreasonable and illogical, and it conveys an untypical or a not traditional work of art. So that's all for the discussion. Thank you everyone, and God bless.
Hello everyone, welcome to the video. My name is Jared Angelo Cudasono and I will be discussing about surrealism. So before we begin, I have here a simple game. So shown on screen are 4 images and I want you to describe the images using a word or a phrase. So if you said these pictures are weird, out of the ordinary, far from reality, imaginary, eerie, illusion, or strange, then you are right. So this is surrealistic art. The definition of surrealism in the dictionary is it is a 20th century avant-garde movement in art and literature which sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind, for example by the irrational juxtaposition of images. Next is the origin and meaning of surrealism. So surrealism officially started with Dadaist writer André Breton in Paris in 1924. Surrealism was an imaginative and artistic development. It recommended that the Enlightenment, the powerful 17th and 18th century scholarly development that supported reason and independence, had stifled the prevalent characteristics of unreasonable unconscious mind. Surrealism's objective was to liberate thought, language, and human experience from the jarring limits of logic. André Breton defines surrealism as psychic optimism in its pure state, by which one proposes to express, verbally, by means of the written word or in any other manner, the actual functioning of thought. So Breton is suggesting that artists bypass reason and objectivity by getting to their heedless mind. So practically speaking, these procedures became known as automism or automatic writing, which permitted specialists to do without cognizant idea and embrace chance while create works of art. It is a creative development that lastingly affects painting, literature, sculpture, photography, and film. Next are the Surrealists. Motivated by Simon Freud's speculations of dreams and unconscious believed insanity was the breaking of the chains of rationale, and they addressed this thought in their specialty by making imagery that was truly incomprehensible and comparing impossible structures onto unbelievable scenes. Though it wound down as a coordinated development, Surrealism has never vanished as an innovative creative principle. Here are some significant artists and their famous artworks. So first artist is Joan Miró. and his artwork is Carnaval de Arlequin. Miro made intricate fantastical spaces in his artworks that are great illustration of surrealism in their independence on dreamlike symbolism and their utilization of biomorphism. If you are not familiar with biomorphism, these are shapes that resembles organic figures but are hard to define as a specific object. He is most popular for his works such as this that portray turbulent yet carefree inside scenes, taking his impact from Dutch 17th century interiors. So seen on screen is the side-by-side comparison of Carnaval de Arlequin and 17th century Dutch interior. The next artist is René Magritte. One of his famous artwork is The Human Condition. René's works are awe-inspiring, classic, and they tend to be intellectual, frequently dealing with visual jokes and the connection between the portrayal of something and the actual thing itself. The Human Condition shows a canvas in front of a window with curtains folded, and in the easel is a perfect replica of the scene behind the canvas, making it blend in with the scenery and not just a perspective copy. And the last artist on our list is named Yves Tanguy, and one of his famous artwork is called Mama, Papa is Wounded. And the most essential turning point for Tanguy in his choice to turn into a painter was in 1923, when he had seen an artwork by Giorgio de Chirico in a shop window. Mama, Papa is Wounded portrays Tanguy's generally common topic of war. The work is painted in a hyper-realistic style with his particularly restricted color palette, the two of which make a feeling of dreamlike illusion of reality. And the picture shown on screen is the work of De Chirico that inspires Tanguy.
Good morning everyone, I'm Maria Blasal V. Bareng from BS Accountancy 2B. My topic for today is Abstract Expressionism. But before anything else, let's have a game first. The name of the game is Jumble Me. There are 5 words that you need to assemble in order to form a word. You have 1 minute to assemble the words. Are you ready? Let's start. Are you done? Let's see the answers. Abstract Expressionism. It is a term applied to new forms of abstract art. In years 1940s and 1950s, it was developed by American painters Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and William de Kooning. It is often characterized by gestural brushstrokes or mark making, and the impression of spontaneity. And these are the famous painters who developed the abstract expressionism and their famous work. First is Jackson Pollock and his painting The Visit. Second is Mark Rothko and his painting Black on Maroon. Last is William de Kooning and his painting Excavation. There are 2 types of abstract expressionism. First is action painters, and second is color-filled painters. Action painters was led by Jackson Pollock and William de Kooning. Worked in a spontaneous improvisatory manner, they often use large brushes to make sweeping gestural marks. The process involves splashing and dripping paint onto canvas. Its approach to painting emphasizes the physical act of painting as an essential part of the finished work. Pollock famously places canvas on the ground and dances around it, pouring paint from the can or trailing it from the brush or stick. In this way, the action painters directly place their inner impulses onto the canvas. One example is Jackson Pollock's number 23. The second type is color-filled painters. It was led by Mark Rothko, Barnett Newman, and Clifford Steele. This group were deeply interested in religion and myth. This approach to painting was developed around 1960 and became known as color-filled painting, characterized by artists using large areas of more or less a single flat color. One example is Mark Rothko's number 16, red, white, and brown. Abstract Expressionism impacted both the American and European art in the year 1950s. This movement shifted the creative modern painting in the post-war decades. This art has been the bridge towards modernized art, with unique techniques such as dripping paints on canvas. This kind of art are still embraced up to the present. And that ends my discussion about the abstract expressionism.
Good day! I'm Almalay Luis Sanduran, and today I'll be discussing to you about pop art and how it has evolved into what it is today. But first, let's sizzle it up and start a scrunch game, in which we first form a word out of scrambled letters and then match it with the corresponding image. So here is the first image. The correct answer is pop art. Next, the correct answer is bright colors. On to the third one. Yes, it's irony and satire. On to the first image. The correct answer is recognizable imagery. On to the second to the last image. Spot on! Yes, it's mixed media and collage. On to the last one. You're dead right, it's repetition. Now, let's get started to our topic. So what exactly is pop art? Pop art is the art of popular culture basically. Since this art coincided with the globalization of pop music and youth culture, as personified by Elvis and the Beatles, who were very prominent at the time this type of art flourished. Thus, pop art is brash, young and fun, and hostile to the artistic establishment. On the other note, pop art is inspired by everything and anything, since pop art arose in response to consumerism, mass media, and popular culture. Furthermore, this revolt began because young artists felt that what they learned in art classes and museums had no bearing on what they saw and did in their daily lives. As a result, they began drawing everyday subjects and sources, assisting in the movement's establishment as a cornerstone of contemporary art. Now, what comprises pop art? Pop art contains a multiplicity and reproduction element that can be seen in a mass production culture and reflected in the media and process. Pop art is also bold and hard-edged. This is because pop art frequently employs primary colors such as red, blue, and yellow, which reflect the vibrant popular culture that surrounds the artist. Furthermore, hard-edged compositions are used in this art to counteract the painterly looselessness of styles such as abstract, impressionism, and abstract expressionism. Pop art also utilizes recognizable imagery from popular media and products. Pop art incorporates irony and satire to the subject matter to make a statement about current events, poke fun facts, and challenges the status quo. Pop artists also employ innovative techniques to rapidly reproduce images in large quantities. Andy Warhol, for example, used silkscreen printing. Pop artists frequently use mixed media and collage. like Marisol Escobar, who is known for her sculptures that depict figures using a wide range of materials. But when did pop art started? In 1950s, pop art originally found its voice in Britain as a reflection of post-war consumer culture, which sought to change a suffocating social order through conformity. In 1952, the independent group, a group of artists, writers, and critics, has begun to discuss how to integrate life and art. In 1956, the independent group held a collective exhibition called This Is Tomorrow at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, which became the key starting point of pop art. Some of the notable exhibits are Richard Hamilton's Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different and So Appealing? Eduardo Paolozzi's Sack O Sauce and Eduardo Paolozzi's I Was a Rich Man's Plaything. Lastly, in the mid-1950s, pop art emerged as an artistic movement against abstract expressionism. There are two types of mainstream pop art. These are British pop art and American pop art. British pop artists were influenced by America's pop culture, while Americans' pop artists were inspired by what they saw and experienced in their own pop culture. While Britain focused more on an intellectual approach, America's style returned to representational art. Britain developed this kind of art in order to change their mindset and envy on America's liberty, while Americans developed this kind of art as a reaction and development against abstract expressionism. These are some famous pop artists that what made pop art is today. Richard Hamilton. Richard Hamilton said that pop art is not just a movement, but a way of life. He is considered as the founder of pop art. He also introduced the idea of the artist as an active consumer and contributor to the mass culture of pop art. His notable works are Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing in 1956, The Beatles' White Album in 1968, and The Funhouse in 1956. Another artist is Roy Lichtenstein. He is one of the first American pop artists to achieve widespread renown. Although he was accused of copying due to his pop art style in the 1960s, he became a leading figure in the movement. His pop art style is inspired by comic strips, and he puts more emphasis on methods of mechanical reproduction. His famous arts are Popeye in 1961, The Drowning Girl in 1963, and The Yellow Landscape in 1965. The last artist is someone whom some art are familiar to all, Andy Warhol. He is famous for his iconic images of Marilyn Monroe, soup cans, and sensational newspaper stories. His style was frequently comic, decorative, and whimsical, with a tone that contrasted sharply with the cold and impersonal mood of typical pop arts. His early 1960s pop arts were influential in breaking down the barriers between high and low art forms. Here are some of his notable works: The Campbell Soup in 1968, and The Gold Marilyn Monroe in 1962.
Good day everyone, today we will tackle about the optical art. So before we proceed, let's play a game first. So this is the first game. Starting in the upper left, say the name of the color of each word, not the word itself. So let me demonstrate the first one and you can do the second one. So it goes like this: yellow, black, purple, orange, red, purple, blue, orange, blue, orange, black, yellow, blue, red, yellow. So now you can do the second one. So the second game is tell me what you can see in the picture. So in the first picture, I saw first a face of a man, but as I stare it a little longer, I see a man who is sitting, two houses, a rice field, and a girl who is wearing a hat. So now you can share what you observe in the second picture. So in the third game, that is how many faces can you see? So you just have to count how many faces you can see in the picture. So let me count how many faces I can see in the first picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In the first picture, I saw 10 faces, and you can now count how many faces you can see in the second picture. So now let's discuss what an optical art or op art is. An optical art is also known as optical illusion art. It was a major development of painting in the 1960s. It used geometric forms to create optical effects, including illusions of vibrations, foreground confusion, and an exaggerated sense of depth. Op painting used a framework of purely geometric forms as the basis for its effects, and also drew on color theory and the physiology and psychology of perception. Sometimes the effects created by an op art range from the subtle to the disturbing and disorienting. Some leading figures of the optical art were Bridget Riley, Jesus Rafael Soto, and Victor Vasarely. So here are the important characteristics of optical art. Optical art exists to fool the eye. It is abstract and non-objective. The elements such as shapes, colors, and lines are carefully chosen to fit the design. Positive and negative space are equally important. Optical art is an aesthetic style that intentionally exploits that oddity of human perception that gives the human eye the ability to deceive the brain through illusions. Mostly, artists create the illusion of movements by carefully using and controlling the shapes, colors, and patterns in special ways to create images that look as if they are moving or blurring. So next are the leading figures of optical art. The first one is Bridget Riley. She is considered as the mother of optical art. She is a British artist concerned with creating movement in black and white and disorientation. She is focused on the effect of patterns to create movement in her pictures. So here are some of her artworks. The first one is The Blaze in 1962. The second one is Fall in 1963. And the third one is The Gala in 1974. As you can see, as you stare at the Bridget's artworks, you can notice that it creates illusion of movements. And for some, including me, I find it disturbing in the eyes. The second one is Victor Vasarely. Victor Vasarely is considered as the father of optical art. He is a Hungarian-French artist who was concerned with making flat canvases appear to have volume and roundness. He found that the perceptions can be fooled through manipulation of lines, shapes, and colors. So here are some of his artworks. First is the Dombriel II in 1973. The second one is the Villiag IV in 1983. And the third one is the Papillon in 1981. As you can observe, his artworks are flat canvases that appears to have volume and roundness. The last one is Jesus Rafael Soto. He is another important optical artist. He was born in Venezuela in 1923. He was an op and kinetic artist. He used both paint and sculpted forms to create his work. Soto's work often involves mobile elements and points up the close connection between kinetic and op art. So here are some of his artworks. The first one is the cube with ambiguous space in 1981. The second one is the maquette Esfera Theospatio in 1989. These artworks are sculptures. The first one is a sculpture and the medium is the silk screen on plexiglass cube. And the second one is also a sculpture made from aluminum and plexiglass. So that's all. I hope you learned something. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Angelilian Mampanya, and today we're going to discuss photorealism. But before that, I prepare a mini game to you, and I know guys that you are all familiar with this game. This game is 4 pics, 1 word. So let's get into it. And now for our first picture, can someone guess what it is? Yes, this is America. Now for the next one. This one is photograph. For the next one. You're right, this is machine. And for the last one, any guess what it is? And yes, this is street. So that's all for our mini game. And now let's all dive into our topic, photorealism. So photorealism is a genre established by American author and art dealer Louis K. Maisel in 1969. Rather than observing events in real time, the style was inspired by photography, using visual information captured by a camera to create illusionistic paintings, drawings, photographs onto canvas to allow images to be captured in precision and accuracy. Among several male practitioners of photorealism, there is an interest in themes of machinery and objects of industry, such as trucks, motorcycles, cars, and even gumball machines. Whereas Audrey Flack, the sole female practitioner, infuses her works with greater emotionality and transcends of life. Photorealism emerged during the same period that produced a variety of disparate art movements, including conceptual art, pop art, and minimalism. Like pop artists, photorealists were interested in breaking down conventional ideas of what was the appropriate subject matter, often looking to mundane scenes from everyday life or commercial objects such as cars, trucks, or signages for inspiration. Here are some of the most influential photorealist artists. The first one is Jack Close. Notable practitioner of the craft, Jack Close creates monumental portraits through exacting realism that utilizes scale, color, and form. He is most recognized for his gridded application that takes individual color squares to form a unified, realistic image from afar. This technique is realized in his 1998 painting Agnes, a tribute to his friend Agnes Martin, who also used the grid technique. So here is an example on Close artwork. This is Jackson Pollock's number 23 in 1948. The second one is Robert Cottingham. Brooklyn-born photorealist Robert Cottingham is best known for his depiction of urban American landscape and typefaces, particularly focusing on building facades, neon signage, movie marquees, and storefronts. His work are displayed in radically compositions, which can be seen in some of his famous compositions like Candy in 1979 and Women Girls in 2000. So here is an example of Cottingham's work. This is Black on Maroon. And the third third one is Richard Estes. American artist Richard Estes is known for his paintings of New York City streets, showcasing an urban aesthetic which he often composed using multiple photographs. Estes is known for including reflective surfaces of storefronts and car windows, which tend to uncover more detail than what the eye see naturally. This is reflected on one of his most notable works, which is Supreme Hardware Store in 1974, which depicts a rundown, cluttered city street filled with reflective signs and storefront windows. So this is Supreme Hardware Store of Richard Estes. And lastly, and the only female practitioner, Audrey Flack. Audrey Flack is a pioneer of photorealism movement and the first photorealist painter whose work was purchased in New York's Museum of Modern Art for its permanent collection. She uses projecting, tracing, and recoloring to produce oversized canvases that depict historical events. She later turned to sculpture to explore female representations in history. So here is Audrey Flack's artwork, Queen, in 1976. So that's all, guys, for photorealism. Bye!
Good day, everyone. I'm Christine Daiwan, and our topic will be minimalism. Throughout our discussion, we'll talk about minimalism and its origin. Also, we'll talk about minimalist artists and their works. But first, let's look at the four artworks and tell whether they are minimalism or not. The first artwork is not a minimalism. The second is a minimalism art. The third is not a minimalism. Fourth is a minimalism art. Now, let's talk about minimalism. Minimalism is an American movement in visual arts and music that emerged in New York City in the late 1960s. It is characterized by the extreme simplicity of form and literal objective approach. It is an uprising against an expressive and abstract form of expressionist art. Some also refer to it as rebellious in nature as the aim of it is to completely convey the basic and fundamental meanings of shapes and colors, or in simple words, it focuses on the state of space around the art and how it connects to the audience and vice versa, disregarding the unnecessary elements. In minimalism art is what you see is what you see. It doesn't mean anything deep. Now, let's talk about minimalist artists. The first one is Frank Stella. The first artworks associated with minimal art or minimalist arts is the Black Series of Frank Stella that is featured in the 16th American exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. These are the artworks of Frank Stella. The Marriage of Reason and Squalor at 2 in 1959. Now let's go to the second artist, which is Carl Ander. Ander produced clear solid forms out of bricks, steel plates, and wood, employing only the simple techniques of cutting, placing, and stacking his materials. Consequently, Ander emphasized and preserved the natural textures and properties of the materials. His artwork, Cedar Piece, in 1964. Andre recreated this sculpture for the exhibition Nine Young Artists at the Hudson River Museum in 1964, and it became the first work of his to be exhibited in public. It consists of equal lengths of standard lumber into which he has cut simple woodworker's joints so that the sculpture can be slotted together and then detached for the purposes of reproducibility. The second artwork is the equivalent 1/8 in 1966. Andre frequently works in a series producing an entire exhibition of sculptures from different arrangements of the same materials as he did for his influential exhibition at the Theodore de Nagy Gallery in New York in 1966. Here, each work consists of an equivalent number of white sand lime bricks, although the 8 stacks are all arranged according to different rectangular formation. Additional artworks are Spill or Scatter Piece in 1966, 144 aluminum square in 1967, and 37 piece of work in 1969. The third artist is Dan Flavin. He is the pioneer of minimalism through the light. He focuses on the effects of permanent light in space. He dedicated most of his career as an artist in pursuing the possibilities of using fluorescent light as a medium. His works progressed from wall installations to massive architectures. His artworks, untitled to Pat and Ballroom in 1969, the one in the upper right is the untitled to Barnett Newman 2, 1971. The one in the bottom left is Dan Flavin Institute. The interior of Dan Flavin Art Institute. And the last one in the bottom right is the untitled for Prudence and Her New Baby in 1992. The last artist that we'll talk about today is Agnes Martin. Nothing in this world applies to my art. It's beyond the world. I paint about happiness and innocence and beauty. That is what he reprised when asked about her art. Martin completely abandoned any abstract expressionist tendency from her style that resulted to carefully calculated with marks paintings. Some of her artworks are the tree in 1964, which is in the upper left, and the White Flower 2 in 1985, which is in the upper right. Then the one in the lower part is the Fiesta in 1985. That's all for today's discussion.
So that's all for all the topics, guys, under new forms and new art forms. And now, as a rundown, Fauvism choose simple subjects, and because of this, the paintings look almost abstract, and this is where the introduction of broad colors. And Expressionism is an umbrella term for any artwork that distorts reality to match the inner feelings, views, or ideas of the artist. And Cubism was a revolutionary new approach to representing reality invented in around 1907 and 1908 by artists Pablo Picasso and George Braque. And Dada art was an art movement formed during the First World War in Zurich in negative reaction to the horrors and the folly of the war. The art, poetry, and performance produced by Dada artists is often satirical and nonsensical in nature. And Surrealism is a 20th century literary, philosophical, and artistic movement that explored the workings of the mind, championing the irrational, the poetic, and the revolutionary. In addition, Abstract Expressionism is all about the term applied to new forms of abstract art developed by American painters such as Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Willem de Kooning in the 1940s and 1950s. Optical art, or op art, was a major development of painting in the 1960s that used geometric forms to create optical effects. And pop art is an art movement that emerged in the 1950s and flourished in the 1960s in America and Britain, drawing inspiration from sources in popular and commercial culture. Photorealism, on the other hand, is a painting style that emerged in Europe and the USA in the late 1960s, characterized by its painstaking detail and precision. And lastly, minimalism as an extreme form of abstract art developed in the USA in the 1960s and typified by artworks composed of simple geometric shapes based on the square and the rectangle. So that concludes our discussion for the new art and new art forms. And I hope you learned something, guys. And remember, art depicts history, and history without art is boring. Goodbye, and until we meet again.